In any conflict, there are two opposing identities or two patterns in tension with one another. And a lot of the tension comes from the intersection of the conscious mind with reality. Because while reality may be perfect, the systems that we use to relate to reality are never perfect. And any two shapes, any two systems will have a certain amount of tension. And you can think of this tension as, well, it's a tension on how reality is refracted, but it's also a question of symmetry and area. Here we see a relatively symmetrical shape on this side, but not so much here. And we've got blind spots over here. And you can see we've got stress around here. If you're moving, all systems are dynamic. So if you're moving through this system, it's going to be relatively easy, relatively difficult, uphill, and then a really sharp angle and a sharp angle, a little bit of conflict and shock. And you're going to leave out this area, this area, this area, this area, and this area, and there's going to be pain in the deficit as the totality of reality is sliced in order to bring it to consciousness, which means it's sliced through culture, through language. And down here, we've got a lot of right angles. Those are hard pivot points. A circle, a sphere, is a very graceful shape. Right angles, and particularly acute angles, are very difficult. And it's one of the reasons why there's a correlation between grace, ease, and complexity. You can think of the sphere as an infinite number of dots, an infinite number of different planes coming together to form the mythical you, the mythical one, the sphere. And you have a lot of grace in a sphere, which is why we move with wheels as opposed to squares. And yet we can't hold infinite distinctions in consciousness. We can only hold 5, 10, 20 different distinctions at a given moment. And so our systems are at best symmetrical refractions of reality with maybe 10, 20 distinctions at any given moment. And many of it, it's just too overwhelming. Let's just say it's good, it's bad, you've got a straight line. It's very difficult to move within that dynamic, and you've got a lot of stress, a lot of simplicity, a lot of stress. So anytime you have two different systems, there's going to be a certain amount of tension. And one of the things that is blocking or binding up the tension is a lack of liquidity, a lack of fluidity, a lack of feminine energy, which is the unknown, the mysticism, the transformation, the movement, the responsiveness. We're dealing with feminine energy. In a traumatic cult, the unknown is terrifying because all of our fears, all of our pains, all of our traumas in the past and the projected future lie in the unknown. So we're pretty addicted to certainty, which means we're pretty addicted to fixation, which means we like to see the world through our particular lens of reality. Because when you look through a square lens, reality is square. When you look through a circular lens, reality is circular. When you look through a triangular lens, reality always seems to have a triangular shape. And in many ways, that familiarity, the fear of the unknown, is counterbalanced by an attachment to certainty, an attachment to fixation, an attachment to avoiding the unknown. And it's not that, it's not that this shape is that much worse than this shape. And if you look carefully, one of the interesting things is, for example, this shape has a piece of the truth not captured in this shape. Because if you think of the psyche as a microcosm of the multiverse, of the possibility-probability field, if you think of the psyche as a microcosm of that, and the lens as defining that part of the psyche, that part of reality and ecology that is conscious and visible, then, for example, this lens, if we look at the circle as the totality of reality and the lens being our personal reality, the personal lens is always significantly smaller. So I guess if this was a real analogy, this sphere would be 1,000,000 times bigger than this little square, and we'd be looking through the shape of our lens at a specific dot. But nonetheless, we can see that, in these two shapes, reality becomes more intelligent, more conscious, more intelligent, and we gain mastery the more we see a complete picture. If a doctor tries to operate on the human body and can only see the finger, but they're operating on the brain, it's very difficult. Anytime we want to influence and interact with reality masterfully, and we can't see it because we've cut it off within the paradigm and within the focus of our cult, you've got a tremendous limitation. So in this shape here, the way it's structured, we've got a four-sided shape, a little bit more difficult than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5, a little bit more graceful than 4. 3 would be even worse. But 20 dots, you start to, if they're symmetrically laid out, you start to get, a more graceful ride. If you're driving in triangle wheels, you know it. But in this shape up here, we've got a little bit of reality that is not captured by this shape, because this reality, this paradigm here, is quite flat. So this person could learn what's going on in reality. If they adopted this system, it would reveal something that this system of thinking and perceiving reality doesn't reveal. So this, and that seems to be, over here as well. We've got two little triangles of awareness that you can learn in this paradigm. And you can think of this as cultural, by the way. If you travel around the world, you will notice that every cult, every culture does something well, focuses on something with mastery and excellence, and then ignores vast swaths of the psyche, vast swaths of human potential, but that are dealt with by other cults, other cultures. And that's why when you travel, you can develop a personal cultural menu. I'm going to do the greeting that they do in India, the namaste. I'm going to do the prayer 5 times a day, like they do in true devotional religion, a religion that actually devotes to something meaningful, in Islamic faith, the rhythmic prayer, etc. I'm going to do the rhythmic prayer, but the prayer I'm going to do is this other prayer. I'm going to do a Buddhist prayer religiously, meaning with devotion 5 times a day. And then I'm going to take this bit from the Bible and this bit from here, and I really love samosas, and and they're great with quesadillas, samosas, and then a great Greek salad. I'm going to mix these bits together out of a larger menu, because one cult has one menu. This is the way the Mexicans eat food, and that's the Mexican menu. You're never going to find a Greek salad or feta cheese on that. Certain cultures emphasize family and this, and that, and the other. So you've got system intention, and when you've got two traumatized cults, you've got a battle. Now this is the battle of the traumatized masculine and the traumatized masculine, because you don't have a battle when you have a truly graceful feminine presence. You've probably seen in movies, or if you're lucky in real life, 5 or 6 egotistical, male curmudgeons who have their little systems all convinced they're right, of course. And a graceful, beautiful woman knows how to flatter a little bit here, offer a little bit of wine. And she's, of course, transcended the egotistical fanaticism. She doesn't care who's right. She's just happy to flow. Oh, how interesting, Monsignor. Oh, very interesting. And she's able to let them all be right, which is really saying, let them all avoid their fear of the unknown, because there's something each one of them could learn from the other, and no truth is true absolutely. It's a rendition of reality, and so a majestic feminine presence is capable of doing what no fanatical mentally oriented professor can do. And I know a little bit about, mental structuring and attachment. And a good way of looking at this is that in a traumatizing culture where that is relatively sociopathic when it comes to young men, who tend to be a little bit more stuck in these kind of higher level fiefdoms of mental constructs, that there's high degree of trauma and volatility, and there's low degrees of empathy and safety bonding securely with other people. And so the natural thing is you need to regulate, you need to learn regulating skills in order to grow. You need a constant that's somewhat stable to bounce off so that you can learn who you are and who you aren't in boundaries. That's essential for learning any environment. So if your emotional and personal relationships are too volatile, you've got an alcoholic who's constantly changing personality, you've got a dissociative, traumatized person who's a bit schizophrenic as a mother, you've got someone incredibly self-centered who's changing the boundaries all the time to whatever suits them. Because that's what narcissists do. They just reinvent the rules constantly. So there's no stable ground. And, so the child can't develop. And the beautiful thing by turning away from cult and people and turning to objects is that objects don't get drunk. Objects don't hit you when they're wrong and they can't face the fact that they're wrong. Objects do what they do for you or anyone else, and so they're a good regulating template. And yet, this creates a certain attachment to objects and to ideas, which are another form of object. They're the masculine form of reality. Objects, structures, ideas, angles, shapes, etc. The feminine is more the angle or more the energy in between, the space between the proton and electron, the way something feels once it's been built. This is more feminine energy, and it's often not available in a cult like our own, a materialistic, somewhat chauvinistic cult. And so little boys turn to something that's more stable. I turned, to things because things were sane. They didn't lie. My stapler didn't say, I'm going to stay here and then suddenly move. It was people that did that. And so I turned towards things. And things answer the chaos, the terror of chaos, the overwhelm of chaos, the overwhelm of volatility and question. The stability of things answer that need to avoid the volatility of trauma. And so they become very precious because the only thing between this overwhelming psychological landscape of trauma and a sense of control and mastery and certainty are the fact that things always behave the way things behave. The floor does what it does, and doors do what they do, and so it's so relieving. And so in this way, I think it's, the empathic continuum is less available in Western men than it is to women, particularly traditionally in the last few hundred years. And as such, it's, you need to regulate and turn to something. So it's things and it's ideas. And so you get caught in your little box, and they're precious. As a little 5-year-old would hold on to his structure, his things, to protect from the fear of the unknown, between overwhelming grief, overwhelming loneliness, craziness, bizarre, frenetic energies going on in the family system that can't be talked about, so they can't be integrated and made sane. So you've got this tension. And we in the West are, and I think among men more than women, we have our little fiefdom, our little square box that we protect, not because there isn't plenty of evidence that it's a complete system, that there are no complete systems, but because we feel safe in the certainty it provides. And if we can just convince other people to see the world the way we do, then we don't have to let go of the certainty and face the overwhelming trauma of the unknown, the overwhelming fear that we escaped from by clinging to, my dad may beat me this way, and they may be screamed here, and this may happen, but my bed always feels this way. Every time I read this book, I used to read books over and over again. It's like, oh my goodness, thank goodness. It still says the same thing. It's wonderful. And so there's this holding. And so we have, we all have our little fiefdom to one degree or another. I would say that the more traumatized we are as individuals and as a culture, the more rigid we are in our attachment to the structures that protect us from the unknown. And it is our ego, the limited sense of self that clings to this and that identifies with the structure we've attached to. I am an American, I'm a man, I'm a cool man, or I'm a rich man, or whatever it is, whatever the structure is, with its various pros and cons. That's me. So we've got, an ego. And there's dogmas. All women are, all men are, all rich people are, all poor people are. You'd never want to date a homeless person. Why? Well, it's this and that, the other. All homeless people are. And so you have dogmas. You have plenty of ignorance, because ignorance is when you hold on to something rigidly. Ignorance is everything that is outside of your set, outside of your little box. And so you can't possibly go outside your little box and see that reality is vastly bigger than the box that you've created to limit most of it in order to feel safe. Because if you can limit most of reality, which you can't even imagine, and then you can limit more of reality that changes a bit too much for you, and get down to this tiny little sliver of reality that always behaves the way it behaves. And boy, do we hate it when some friend of ours suddenly picks up and decides to change religion or do this or that or the other, and they're not behaving the way that we've assigned them. They're not the person that makes us laugh anymore. What do you mean that you're a philosopher? You're the one who makes me laugh. Do it. That's why you're in my box. And so we get very upset with change, and it's very interesting, to understand the correlation between fear and pain, because without pain there is no fear. Fear is pain projected in the future. If there's no time, or there's no pain anticipated in the future, there's no fear. You don't fear the past; it's done. You don't fear the present. You're fearing the next moment. What will they say next? What will happen to so-and-so? If I do this, could I lose all my money and then be on the street? I'm afraid of projected pain in the future. And I'm afraid of shame. I'm afraid of ostracization and all of that. So all fear is built on projected anticipated pain, and all pain is built from a deep longing. I want this, something good, something beautiful, something true, something whole, something pleasurable, something good. I want that. And I imagine it this way and this way because I don't like the chaos of the unknown. So it has to be this and nothing else because that's what I want and I don't want anything else. And again, you can tell unhappy, traumatized children by how fixated they are in only one thing. You know, it's usually the toy that they can't have, the one toy they can't have. That's the only thing that'll make me happy. And you give it to them and it's like, what, they're enjoying another toy? You know, and so you've got very unhappy, fixated individuals, you know, trying, I want this and I'm separate from it. So there you have pain. With pain comes pain management, addiction, control. You know, I'm right. You know, pomposity, distractions, you know, a whole range of different things in the pain management domain. And, you know, and a lot of it, you know, one of the things that we have with our certainty paradigms, and George Bush Jr., you know, kind of identified this very well. They're the evil people and you're with us or you're against us. And if you're with us, you must support this faulty war that we're, you know, going to be causing 1 million civilians PTSD. We'll blow up, you know, tens of thousands of children. We'll do this. We'll do that. You know, on you know, a complete hoax of non-existent weapons of mass destruction. But you're with us or against us in this way. This is the way the world is, and we are the good guys, and you're the bad guys, and this is what good guys do, and that's what we do to bad guys, and that's the way the world works, and isn't America great, and all this stuff. It's this nice little cult-like box that's literally, you know, blowing up millions of lives in one way or another, psychologically, emotionally, financially, physically, leaving generations of PTSD in its wake, and you know, the horrors of Abu Ghraib, and there's any number of tragedies. But this is the way it has to be, and all of this ties in with alliance with the ego, because the question is, what are you going to be loyal to? Are you loyal to anything? We are. We are all loyal to things. So the question is, what? Because the question is not, are you a loyal person? The question is, what are you loyal to? Are you loyal to your dogmas, or your cult's dogmas, or your parents' dogmas? Are you loyal to your ignorance? No, that doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is this, and I see it in front of me, and that's how I know it would, you know, exist. You know, all the doctors that mocked Louis Pasteur, who discovered germs indirectly, as he questioned why so many patients leaving the surgery died shortly after being healed by their doctors. And he inferred and discovered that there were germs, something that you couldn't see, but they must be there because if you washed your hands and cleaned and sterilized, you know, the saws that they used to saw off legs and amputees, etc., the fatalities went way down. And all the doctors scoffed at him. They mocked him. You know, there's Louis Pasteur with his imaginary germs, because, of course, they knew that if you couldn't see it, it wasn't real. Just like we know that, you know, in the reductionist, materialist science paradigms, we know that consciousness isn't real. It's complete delusion. You know, all the books that the scientists write about this are also complete delusions. You know, if you really read a reductionist materialist scientist and follow their conclusions to the end,
you don't exist, and the book doesn't exist, and all of the scientists' thoughts and theories about consciousness are complete delusions, according to those scientists, because their own consciousness doesn't exist. And it's completely random, meaning all their book is just pure randomness, which, of course, somewhat weakens sales. Why would you buy their book if the core premise of the book is that everything is completely random and that consciousness doesn't influence reality? Because, well, then why bother buying the book, since it's a delusion that's not going to have any influence? And so, obviously the writers of materialist reductionist scientists think that their books are important. The question is why, when they've said that their books are randomly generated without any purpose and that consciousness itself is probably a delusion that doesn't even exist. Why is it so important then that you understand that, if that and your consciousness doesn't exist either? You have dogmas, you have ignorance, you have shames, you have addictions. Addictions are always distractions or pleasure compensating mechanisms or repetitive behaviors that all minimize, overwhelm, and stop you looking at a certain area. And when you've got a painful area that you can't face, an area that you believe you will die if you look at that face, it's not uncommon to kill, to rape, to murder, to lie, to betray, to destroy an entire life simply to avoid looking at a certain truth, at a certain fact, at a certain pattern of feeling that feels like if we open up to the truth of that, it will crush us. We can't survive the truth coming out in some secret or other, and so we'll do anything imaginable, including kill ourselves, to avoid that. And so we can be loyal to the ego's various coping mechanisms. The other thing that we can be loyal to, and we can also be loyal, so we can be loyal to someone's ego. We can also be loyal to best practices. So for example, seatbelts save lives. If you wear your seatbelt, and everyone in your car wears seatbelts, statistically speaking, fatalities and injuries go way down. And of course, the automakers didn't want to put in seatbelts. They said it would ruin driving. If you go back to when the legislation about seatbelts was, we've got to fight this. We've got to be free. No, we can't put seatbelts. We'll go bankrupt putting seatbelts in. And so you can be in alliance with the dogmas of the automobile companies or the cigarette companies. Or you can be loyal to best practices. Now, on the surface, there is a tension. Now, this particularly comes in personal relationships. So your dad is a committed, ignorant chauvinist, a bigot. Gay people should be dead, whatever. And you're with me or you're against me and all of this. And you love Dad. You love Dad. And you understand at a deep level perhaps the terror of change, the terror of facing the unknown that leads him to cling so desperately, so confusedly. A 7-year-old, an 8-year-old just found this certainty and clung to it for dear life because his dad did, because so-and-so, the bully who beat them up, did, and that seemed to, answer a 7-year-old's call to safety and certainty. So they're clinging to that, and you understand, you feel sorry for Dad. He's an idiot. But, he can't let go of that dogma. And he's not really a bad guy, except when you ask him to decide between human decency, humanity, logic, love, and intelligence, and his dogma. because the dogma is what protects him from his fear of the unknown. And this is why being a traumatically illiterate culture is so damaging, is that when you traumatize young people, they find something stable to cling on to, which is often somewhat random and somewhat absurd and costly in the long term. But when you have a traumatically illiterate culture that never helps them find a better coping mechanism, and then when you shame people for asking for help, part of chauvinism, and shame people for being feminine, having feelings, again, part of chauvinism, they're stuck there because as soon as they let go of their dogma, they feel overwhelmed with grief, overwhelmed with feelings, overwhelmed with the femininity that they have learned is subhuman their entire life in a chauvinistic cult. And so there's a challenge. And you take pity on them, of course, to some degree. And the question is, what do you side with? Do you side with the person who's going to betray, stone, attack, destroy, humiliate your best friend who happens to be homosexual, or your Muslim girlfriend who, is the ultimate evil, apparently, to ignorant chauvinists who don't understand, the idea that if there have been 10,000 cults throughout human history, 10,000 cultures, according to anthropologists, well, most of them are dead, which means they failed at some level. Meaning if those first 9,900 cults had worked perfectly, we wouldn't have developed our cult. We would still be in one of those. The reason that there are so many different cults is they're all wrong. I mean, what are the odds? I mean, every cult in human history has all said the same thing. This is the way it's done. It's the only way it's done, and we are right. And everyone else is wrong. That is the definition of a cult. And the function of a cult is to protect a scared population from the unknown. And the only people so scared of the unknown that they would willingly dive into that level of ignorance and stupidity is a traumatized cult. Traumatized individuals seeking certainty are offered mass stupidity as a reassuring thing. It may not be right, but at least we'll all agree that it is, and protect us from the unknown. Do we protect the person? Are we loyal to the cult, to the country, to the individual, to good old dad? Or are we loyal to best practices? Now, best practices involve the healthy aspect of the scientific method, because you have the political aspects of science where, good old curmudgeon so-and-so, who worked for 60 years and who has friends here and who, gets money donated from the Rockefellers for this and that. He says, this is the way it is, this is my theory, and no one's going to challenge it. And he doesn't give grants to anyone who challenges his theory. And he humiliates and he gangs up, with his other cronies. Like, they're disrupting our theories with new evidence, new data that's ruining our comfortable models of reality. And so you have the political aspect of science, which, all kinds of, bigotries, discrimination, selective bias, ignoring the data that doesn't support, the theories, refusing to say the obvious truth because so-and-so is in the room, even though it's obvious, getting together to organize the speed of light because it seems to be changing and it's ruining, it's ruining the truth that says the speed of light is a constant. But it's changing. It's going up, and then it's going down, and it's going up again. And so let's just have a committee to agree on the speed of light, because it's embarrassing, that every time we take a reading, it's shifting around. And so we're not going to take readings anymore. We're just going to announce that this is the amortized speed of light, and regardless of any future data, That's wrong because this is our theory. In the positive side of science, you have statistical correlation. Every time I think move this finger, it moves. That's a pretty strong statistical correlation. So I'm going to make a theory that says that I can move my finger when I say move my finger. Now, there are some theorists that are saying that's actually wrong. They're actually saying that my finger moves before the thought is generated to move my finger, which means that consciousness is an illusion. It's just kind of an after-the-fact kind of thing. You think you're moving your finger, but in fact, your finger is doing whatever it would have done anyway, and and then you come up with the idea that you did it after the fact, just to feel comfortable that you're in some degree of control, something like that. Now, but best practices correlate with things like people that eat healthy whole grains, vegetables, organic meats seem to be a little bit lower weight than people who eat, high carb, sugar, lots of dairy and stuff. Statistically, that seems to be the way. And people who drink a lot of arsenic seem to die at elevated rates, so we're going to recommend against arsenic. And so what best practices is all about is everyone wants to feel good, and nobody wants to feel bad. Everyone wants to feel good for a long time, and wants to feel bad for a short time. This is, a motivational guide, and best practices are the ongoingly researched, data-based answer to what does that. What's the best practice to driving? Do you just drive through red lights anytime? No, the statistical data says much higher fatalities doing that right now. You could do it, but it's just much higher fatalities. Or do you stop and wait? And does everyone ride wherever they want, or does everyone ride on the right side? No, if everyone agrees to ride on the right side of the road, fatalities go way down. And this, every time we test the hypothesis, let's put blindfolds on people, drive them out, see how many car crashes there are. Now let's take off the blindfold, everyone drive on the right side of the road, and bingo, traffic fatalities go down. It's just a best practice. And of course, there can be better practices. Tesla's autonomous vehicle has now driven well over 1 billion miles and has 8 times fewer fatalities, fewer accidents per million miles than human drivers. And that's the starting point. So Tesla's self-driving, enhanced autopilot type features, when engaged, have 800% fewer accidents. So it's becoming a best practice with data, meaning the more billion miles driven, the more data there is. And the data will also, in time, get parsed down into more data points to say that 80% of the accidents in autopilot are this kind. And so therefore, using the 80-20 principle, Tesla should work on the algorithm for preventing, what's causing 80% of the problem, rather than focus all its energy on what's causing 0.001 of the accidents. So you have best practices. Now, you have this interesting paradox. Because let's say this was your best friend, and your best friend lies, and lies, and lies. And lying is not a best practice, statistically speaking. There are very high prices to lies, some of which are not measured in our culture. Empathy, for example, is devastated by lies. By the person lying. Meaning it's very difficult to empathize with the person you're lying to. It's very difficult to empathize with yourself when you can't empathize with other people. Love goes down when you have lies, because what a lie is it's saying, I'm over here, but I'm telling you I'm over here. So I want you to love what's over here, but I'm over here. I want you to love a faithful sexual partner. That's the lie. But I'm not a faithful sexual partner. I want you to love a faithful sexual partner. Are you in love with that person I say that I am? Yes. Okay, good. You love who I'm not. I'm over here, though, hiding. I'm not loved. I know, or at least have reasonable cause to doubt, because why do you lie if you believe you are lovable? And this is a really critical conundrum with lying. Why do you lie if you believe that you, authentic you, is lovable? What's the point? The predication, the foundation for so many of our lies is the belief that who we are is shameful and unlovable. Therefore, it's pointless to try and get someone to love who we are. But I don't want to give up entirely. I believe that I can put on a show of a convincing lie and get people to love what I'm not. Because I'm unlovable. That's the foundational belief begun in childhood, is parents didn't love you, and so every child takes that on, as I must be unlovable because my godlike parents couldn't make any mistakes, surely. So if they don't love me, I'm not lovable. If I'm not lovable, I'm not going to be loved for who I am. But I might be lovable for who I'm not. So if I can figure out what looks like a lovable person and pretend to be them, then the people around me can love who I'm not. But I still, consistent with the belief, am unloved. Because I'm not being loved for me, based on the daily affirmation that who I truly am is not lovable. That's why I never bring them out. And this is the problem, the mathematical problem with lying. You know, if you say, okay, fine, I'm lovable, but I need to lie because I'm so dumb, I could never make money if I didn't lie. I have to steal it. I'm an idiot, so I can't make any money. So I've got to embezzle, I've got to do something because I'm an idiot. I can't possibly take care of myself as I truly am because I'm dumb. So what's the alternative? Well, I better lie and cheat because then I might be able to survive. Well, of course, the problem is that it's difficult to grow as a person when you're constantly affirming that the reason you have to cheat and steal is because you're too dumb to do it otherwise. Because fundamentally, people generally come down to the idea that they think they're okay. It's certainly schizophrenic, because right under that we often have unlovable, etc. But, that if there's a crime, it's justified, and, and this, and that, and the other. But, of course, it's difficult to advance if every time you lie is based on the belief that you've got to because you're dumb and you couldn't make it, another way. Or if you're a jerk and you say that jerks aren't lovable, well, then you've got another problem. If you say the reason I lie and cheat is because I'm a jerk and jerks are not lovable, you've got another mathematical problem. How are you going to give and receive that most vital, transference of energy with the rest of the universe, of, giving and receiving the breath of life, if you're not worthy of it? It's a dysfunctional belief. So best practices, but if if they lead to an alliance with human well-being. So you're in lust and in love with your boyfriend, and your boyfriend wants to lead a life of crime and wants to rob a bank and wants to, cheat some woman out of her savings, and then wants to drive off without helping this kid he runs over, and wants to drink and drive. And of course, as any old egotist says, you're with me or against me. You want to split, but this is who I am. Riddled with all these, these faulty beliefs and habits and all that. And don't challenge me, because I'll leave you, or I'll hate you, or I'll punish you, or I'll throw all the dirt I have on you in your face, etc. Because you need to be a friend of mine. You got to be friends with my dogma. You got to be friends with my ignorance. You've got to not only be friends with my ignorance, but you've got to stop challenging it. So that's what is required to be seen as loyal to me. Agree with me, do this, do what I say, do it when I want, and all this. So that's kind of what we have there. On the other hand, you have best practices, which are in alliance with human well-being. The more egotistical, ignorant, fear-based, controlling, addictive we are, as a general rule, the more unhappy. And the more everyone tiptoes around that indefinitely, without seeking, any integration, any challenge to that system, the more miserable the person will be for the rest of their life. And so, do you have an alliance with their dogmas and their little pictures of reality, or do you have an alliance with their human well-being? And the interesting thing about well-being is kind of the opposite with pain. As a general rule, pain, high levels of pain, brings out the worst in people. High levels of pain without empathic response leads to high levels of fear, which without empathic response leads to high levels of trauma, which without empathic response leads to high levels of terror, which without empathic response lead to high levels of addiction. And if you've ever been in relationship with an addict and you've paid attention, you come second to the drug. The drug may be sex, the drug may be porn, the drug may be money, the drug may be busyness, the drug may be fame and glory. The drug could be anything. It could be I'm going to do what I do and don't do that. Could be talking, whatever it is. But there's a moment in the interaction when someone is on drugs in which the human empathic, intelligent thing to do is this, and the addictive thing to do is this. And when asked to choose between those two, the addict always chooses the drug. You always come second. And addictions and drugs are very valuable short-term pain management strategies. But over time, they create more and more pain, which is, a real, tragedy. So if you tolerate someone's addiction as a condition for being in a relationship with them, and that is the primary condition most addicts have. I'm a control freak, and if you won't let me control you, you're out, because that's my addiction. I'm a this, and if you don't let me do this, you're out, because that's my addiction. I will always choose opium over you. I will always lie to get my drugs and betray you. I will expose this family to risk, etc., because I'm loyal to the drug. High levels of unmitigated pain draw out the worst in people. And best practices, which lead to human well-being, draw out the best in the other. We all have a range of probable selves. from our most miserable, pathetic, fear-based, terror-based, traumatized, sociopathic, to the most exalted, the most beautiful, the most transcendent. We have a range of probable selves. And as a general rule, unmitigated levels of high pain bring out the low level of that continuum. Best practices leading to well-being brings out the high part of that continuum. And so it's a very interesting continuum. You could say that at the core, the loyalty is between the ego and its addiction and its coping mechanisms, its dogmas, its fixation, its cult thinking, and the higher self. The higher self being higher than the lower self, the higher self being a more beautiful, true, and authentic expression of the self before chronic pain took it into a tailspin. As a general rule, children born into an incredibly healthy set of best practices do not find themselves in chronic trauma and pain, which means they don't find themselves grasping for dogmas and this and that to get out of it, which means that they blossom in the higher side of the probable self. So really what we're talking about in the question of who are you loyal to in yourself. So when you want another pint of Haagen-Dazs, or you want to write in your journal and become conscious of your feelings, which one do you do? The one elevates consciousness as a best practice, leading towards more awareness, towards more self-respect. There's also, a pain management aspect in this, and these two are not enemies. The ego, with its addiction, kept you alive, kept your abuser alive at some point. The pain was too high. The morphine allowed the operation to take place and heal without you screaming and ripping the scalpel from the surgeon, and running out of the hospital. The morphine kept you alive, but now it's driving your life. At one point, the addiction was the dogma, the fixation, let you survive. And now it's destroying your best probable self by not releasing you from the addiction. And if you think a little bit about horseback riding, you could say, okay, I'm fat, I'm out of shape, I'm going to go horseback riding. And if you have a kind person taking you riding for the first time, it may feel pretty good with all the endorphins pumping after, an hour of riding, but they say, come on, stop. You're going to feel crappy for a couple of days, and then you can do it a little bit more if you're up for it. There is, in the direction of a best practice, a moving away from addiction, a moving away from fixation, from clinging, from protections, and a moving towards a larger frame of reference, a more creative and dynamic, a larger world. And the question is, how fast do you move that? Some kick the habit like this, heroin, whatever, they just, boom, done. Others, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this. I need a crutch. I need something. I need help as I transition from one addiction, one fixation to another. I was madly in love with this person. Oh my gosh, now they're leaving me. I can't let them go. Okay, I can be madly in love with you and, hold on to you. Oh my goodness. Now they're starting to leave me. I need help to interrupt the addictive cycle gently, kindly, to have a circle of presence, a circle of love, a circle of healing, a circle of beauty around me. So that as the pain emerges to consciousness and the terror of the pain emerges to consciousness, that we transcend the traumatic dissociation, that we face the part of ourself that is separate from and longing for. And we hold that part. And we integrate that part. And we help it get back on its feet. And we let it know that we've survived. The drugs, the pain, whatever, it got us through. We're here. Let us know that we've survived. And the reason that the transition towards best practices is so important is that only best practices, which are simply defined as the actions that statistically, using all the data available to us, has the highest chance of bringing human well-being. That is a best practice. That is intelligent action. Only a best practice has the best chance of bringing well-being. Only well-being heals pain. Only reducing pain reduces the fear of pain in the future. And only reducing fear allows us to think about the future creatively and constructively. And only thinking visionary about the future and acting visionary can transcend the structures that we've used to identify ourselves and can allow us to step into a new and transcendent world. And it is that new and transcendent world, that more than anything else can heal pain, can heal fear, can connect us to our truth, our beauty, our goodness, and can lead to the best probable self, which is never an addict. So, the gratitude to the unconscious addiction as a child, to the coping mechanism and the protection against the unknown, for as long as that's there. But the loyalty of a growing species, of a growing human, is always to best practices, never to dogmatic ties. If you're my best friend, I'm going to see that you wear your seatbelt or my seatbelt more than a stranger. And if you fight me and want to drive drunk, I will fight for the best practice. And there's a very logical way for this that, is transcends selfishness and selflessness. There's often a false dichotomy between selfishness and selflessness. You're a selfish person, why don't you be more selfless? Well, when you're truly selfless, you're also very selfish. If you're truly selfless and love someone, you don't let them drive drunk and without a seatbelt. If you keep your best friend alive, whether they have a fit at you or not, if you keep your best friend alive and they grow and their pain goes down, you've now got a decent best friend who's still alive. So selflessness becomes selfishness on the intersection of best practices. If you teach someone how to invest using best practices, Ray Dalio gave a brilliant lecture on the most competent focus being effective diversification. in investment assets, for the average person, as a way of reducing risk while still getting a similar return. And if you care about your friend, you want them to invest using best practices. That's the opposite, by the way, of here's a way to get rich quick, put your money here. You care about best practices. Now, what do you get if you help a friend for 30 years invest well? You get a rich friend who's in less pain, who's more creative. Or, if you don't help with a best practice, you get a poor friend who's frantic, dependent, afraid of their unlovability, and is lying to compensate for the belief that their authentic self is unlovable. That's not selfish to end up with a friend like that. It's selfish to end up with a knowledgeable, intelligent, competent friend who has the money to take care of themselves and you. That's intelligent, that's selfish, but it's also selfless. Best practices in every area enhance life, create abundance, create healing, create love, create value, create sustainability. Sustainability of life, sustainability of love, sustainability of healing. Best practices. And of course, when we're an addict and when we're stuck in our little box, and when we identify that we are the box rather than the one looking through the box, we will try and find data that supports that best practices support what we want to do. Chocolate supports antioxidant stuff, and chocolate supports reduce breast cancer, and so does red wine, by the way, and do this and do this. That we'll fixate. That's why I'm drinking and smoking and eating chocolate and getting fat and doing all this and losing my interview the next day because I'm doing best practices. And so when we're an addict, we want to look good. We may try and move best practices to whatever it is we're addicted to doing anyway, because then we feel better or look better, to other people. But when two people continue to look at the data with nuance, in a non-addictive state, in a secure state, where their identity is not locked up in their current model of reality, where their identity is something bigger, and this is where spirituality comes in. Because when you have an intimate personal relationship with the divine, with the transcendent, when you know you're way bigger than the box that you're looking through, you're not threatened when the lens changes. You're curious about what you can see when the box changes. Because, if you look at reality with a kaleidoscope and stuff, every time the structure changes, you see different shapes. You see light in different patterns. So when you go over and eat snails with the French, or eat grasshoppers with the Chinese, or do this, and you see a different reality. Alcohol is very different when it's consumed in long chanting weekends in the Peruvian mountains than when it's consumed solo in a bar. Smoking is different in in a Native American peace pipe ceremony than nervously smoking cigarettes to avoid looking at some thought that's terrifying. So we don't have as much dogma. Alcohol is good, alcohol is bad, smoking is good, smoking is bad. This should be banned. Hemp is good. No, it isn't. Marijuana is the heavenly cure. No, it isn't. It's there's a lot of context, and it becomes more and more sophisticated. You can say that smoking a Peeps pipe in this context is better than not doing it, in an imperfect continuum of beauty, truth, and goodness. And drinking in this context is better than isolation, and better than drinking in this other context. And that smoking cigars is better than sitting in and watching TV if you're outside and enjoying the stars in this context. But that, doing this other thing is, or, joining an organized religion, heaven forbid, for those New Agers, joining an organized religion is probably better than bitter isolation and cynicism, about how nobody understands us, for the rest of our lives. It's a continuum. So best practices in general are moving in a continual direction towards the behavior that creates love and well-being. Towards the behavior that creates love and well-being. And as we create more love and well-being, we bring out the best version of our probable selves. As we bring out the best version of our probable selves, our pain goes way down, and we can give up the addictions, the distractions that take us away from the best self that we can become.